Hello everybody and welcome to our channel where we discuss autism and sorry, I've got a fuzzy co-star running around. She just assaulted me, so I got dog fur everywhere. Where we discuss autism and its effects on people from the standpoint of our own experiences. My stepson is autistic. I am autistic. So we want to bring it out. I know there's a lot of channels out there like this. We just figure we may have something that we can add to it. So for today, I want to talk about the history of autism. It's got a not a super long history, but the word first appeared well over a century, well, not well over, but over a century ago, and since then there have been some strides towards helping autism at least, and of course some away from it as well, or at least not the best strides. So originally, the first time the word autism really appeared was in 1908, where it was used to describe schizophrenics that had an extreme desire for aloneness, is what it was called, or isolation, and that was its first real use, and it was tied to schizophrenics. And the thing about autism that a lot of people that don't have it don't understand is that it is not necessarily a desire to be alone, although sometimes that can be displayed. It's more of an inability to know how. So it tends to withdraw people with the difficulties that autism creates with social constructs, with social interactions and social IQ, emotional IQ, empathy, things along those lines. It's so difficult, and a lot of autistics end up experiencing so much, I'm not going to call it trauma, but end up experiencing so many negatives, especially through their childhood and even early adult years, that they tend to appear to withdraw. Part of it is, of course, some of the things such as many of us have difficulty with eye contact. Cameras are easier for me, but even then I still, you notice I'll look away every so often just because I'm looking at my own eyes because I have the screen towards me. So things like that, the shying away from eye contact, the shying away from touching, even shaking hands, things along those lines, that tendency to pull away from people makes it look like autistics prefer to be alone, which is generally the exact opposite of the truth. They just oftentimes don't know how, or have experienced things throughout their lives that have made them cautious, I suppose would be the best way to put it. So 1908. First used to describe schizophrenics. Now, in 1943, there was a child psychologist named Leo Kanner. He published a paper that dealt with, I believe it was 11 children, let me take a look at 11 children who were extremely intelligent, but in his own words, they showed a powerful desire for aloneness and an obsessive insistence on persistent sameness. He named it early infantile autism. Now, the thing is with these particular things, for instance, highly intelligent, that is something that is used to describe a lot of autistics. It does not show up in every autistic person, and because of some of the social interactions and tendency to take things very, very literally, say things very, very literally, it's also hard to really describe it as intelligent. More of, areas, I suppose, mathematics, music, art, things along those lines. Less of a global intelligence, because oftentimes people that show this show things that other people think are weird, odd, or they think, oh, this person is, I hate to say it, but they'll actually make comments, especially kids. Kids are mean. They don't mean it, but kids are mean. They'll make comments, like such and such is stupid, because they don't pick up on the sarcasm. They don't pick up on the hidden meanings, things along those lines. Autistics, a lot of them just don't. They're very, very literal thinking, very, very literal thinking. So that the intelligence does show up in quite a few. We will have an episode. We're actually going to talk about some famous people that have been diagnosed with autism, and some famous people that likely have it but have not been officially diagnosed. And you'll notice that a lot of times they show a high degree of intelligence, which is probably how they became famous, of course. And the powerful desire for aloneness that he talks about, we already discussed a little bit about how that can show up when they don't really necessarily want to be alone. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later too. And then the obsessive desire for persistent sameness. It's one of the things that comes up with a lot of autistics. We can't say all, because the thing about autism is literally no two are alike. There are so many signs, so many symptoms, so many pieces to autism that you can't just pigeonhole and say, these things show up in every autistic person, or even if they do show up, they display differently or they are reacted to differently, because it's not a condition that just has a finite set of symptoms. It's more of the fact that the brain just works differently. It works differently than what we consider the social norm. So that can display itself in so many different ways. And a simple one, people that have difficulty with eye contact, right? That can be displayed in so many different ways that sometimes it may not even be all that noticeable, especially ones that are very, very good at masking, which will be another episode or 3 that we talk about masking and what that means and how it can present, or at least how it presented with me. Because it's something that people, it would help people to understand. Now, the obsessive insistence on persistent sameness. It was a mouthful. I mean, this is a long time ago, 1943. That is one thing that autistics are known for. A lot of them is the routine. They function best within a routine. The more rigid the routine, the more rigid the structure, the better they are. That's why children with autism that are displaying autism traits oftentimes have difficulty with things that are new. Even the most simple things such as transitioning from a diaper to underwear can be an absolute battle right at the very the first few days and or even up to the first week, because it just because it is different, and autistics thrive on the same schedules, rigid details, rigid structures, the same thing every single day. That's how you'll see some autistics that have a tendency to eat the same things over and over and over and over again, or always get up at the same time, always have to go through the same ritual prior to going to school or going to work for adults or anything. Just having this ritual they have to do. Maybe going into work, they have to do the same 2 or 3 things when they first get there. And that structure, it almost comforts autistics, because again, they have so much difficulty with social interactions and social cues, and almost everything we do is social. Almost everything we do deals with other people. Obviously, when you're at home doing your rituals as you're getting ready to go out, that's not necessarily a social thing, other than the fact that schedule, that comfort, that sameness, it can feel comforting, which will help with the anxiety that is building, knowing that you are going outside, that you are going to somewhere that you're going to have to interact with people, even people that you know. It's surprising how even when you're comfortable with some people, there can still be a little bit of anxiety associated with that because of the difficulties with the social stuff. So those rigid schedules, they're in a way comforting for most autistics. Plus, there's so much confusion in our brains on what to do, because we can't pick up on hidden meanings and on subtlety. We really don't. We miss so much, and having these routines helps us know that we were doing what we were supposed to be doing. Plus, a lot of the masking that goes on with autistics is the fact that they have seen certain situations a whole bunch of times. They themselves have experienced difficulties with them, so what they've done is they've watched other people that did not have difficulties and saw what they did and copied it. So even getting ready for work, if somebody that they see is really good with other people, says something as simple as I always put my keys in the same spot when I get home, you might see the autistic person copy that, and sometimes it's unconscious. There's a story I read in a book from the viewpoint of a number of autistics or parents of autistics, and one of them talked about how these connections can be built into the brain that they don't understand. The author of this particular blurb was talking about their son who would he would mime taking off a hat and then putting it back on and then say, "That makes me happy." And that was his sign of something that he enjoyed, something that made him happy. And the parents were just they were confused. They were so confused at where how does that makes me happy? How did those two get connected into this child's brain? And years later, they discovered in an old VHS tape, and I remember VHS. I remember when VHS tapes came out, so I'm kind of old too. They had a old golf tournament that they had recorded, and in it, one of the golfers makes this crazy shot, a chip shot, awesome chip shot, and it goes in. Everybody starts applauding, and the golfer doffs his hat to everybody, puts it back on, and says, "That makes me happy." And that's when they figured out that their child had seen that, and it just connected into the brain that those two things are connected. So the brain, it works oddly. It works different, not oddly. It works differently. So rigid structures certainly help, and sometimes they're created without our knowing. So the next year, so that was 1943, early infantile autism, because when it first was discovered, autism was considered a childhood thing. It was not considered something that adults would have or would have with the same frequency. And that's attributed a lot to masking and things along those lines. So the next year, in 1944, German scientist Hans Asperger has his own study that he describes milder symptoms of autism, milder form of autism that eventually became known as Asperger's syndrome. And he used cases of highly intelligent children that again had difficulty with social interactions and had specific obsessive interests. And it was a milder form, but it was still absolutely autism. Using a few examples of fictional examples. I don't know how many of you guys out there have seen CSI, but the original main character, Gil Grissom, he presents as someone that would be on the Asperger's end of the spectrum, highly intelligent, can be literal, not the best with social cues. The abilities that he does have with social cues don't come from an instinctive ability to read people, but they come from experience and having seen things so many times that he just has almost like this catalog of reactions that he is able has learned to interpret, not understand, to interpret. It definitely has that awkwardness, and most of us know people that are socially awkward. They're socially awkward, and the more research I've done into autism, once I discovered that I was, the more I realized that a lot of those people that are considered socially awkward, obviously they are. I mean, if you have difficulties with social interactions, regardless of the reasons why, you would be socially awkward. It doesn't matter if it's your fault or not. You still would be considered socially awkward within today's society. Most of them are probably on the Asperger's or definitely on the ASD spectrum, the autism spectrum disorder. But the Asperger's, again, kind of a milder form. It eventually was folded within the ASD spectrum, but that was later on. So now we have a time jump of a few decades. So in 1977, they did research on twins, and they found that autism is largely caused by genetics, not 100%, but largely caused by genetics, and biological differences in brain development. That's why autism is now considered a neurological disorder. It's not a disease, anything along those lines. It's considered a neurological disorder because the brain works differently. The brain works differently, and as our science has improved, we're able to do things like brain scans and stuff like that, see areas of activity within the brain. They're getting better at figuring out some of the signs within brain activity and how it works, and that has actually helped a lot of autism research, and sadly, autism research is not anywhere near where it should be. And again, I'll talk about that a little bit later as we get a little bit closer to modern times. So that's in 1977. So and they use twins because with twins, especially with identical twins, if one has autism, is on the autism spectrum, there is a huge, I don't remember the percentage off the top of my head, there's a massive chance that the other one does as well. Not 100% though, but a massive chance. If they are not identical twins, they still have something like a 40% chance, 44%, 34% chance of also being on the spectrum. The thing is, oftentimes the spectrum is so wide that sometimes you don't realize it. You don't discover it on someone. You don't discover that they are autistic. So go fast forward a few more years later, 1980, we've got infantile autism. It's the first time that it gets listed in the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. It's kind of the psychologist and psychiatrist Bible, I suppose. I've seen it. It's a huge book. I hope they don't have to memorize that for school because that is just an absolutely insane book. But that's the first time that it is listed, and it's listed as early infantile autism. So now we're going to fast forward a few more years, and there's going to be a few changes to the DSM. So the first one in 1987, the DSM replaces infantile autism with autism disorder and a more expanded definition, and they begin to put out a schematic of diagnostic criteria, I suppose, things that they look for. And one of these days I'm going to go back, I'm going to see if I can find that listing. I'm sure it's on the internet, everything's on the internet, just because I'm curious at what the diagnostic criteria was back then when our understanding of it was so much smaller. Because now we know that there's literally hundreds of symptoms. Oftentimes now with diagnosing autism, there are, you generally take tests that will cover multitudes of symptoms, and it's almost like a percentage thing. If you hit a certain number of marks on this, then you have a likelihood of being autistic, and you hit X more marks, you have a higher likelihood. Nothing, again, is guaranteed, but because there's so many symptoms now, it's almost just, it's a bigger test. But I'm very curious of what the original criteria was. I'm going to guess things like desire for aloneness, or what appeared an apparent desire for aloneness, and things such as the rigid structures and stuff along those lines. Which also, by the way, is why some of the most common signs, such as the inability with the difficulties with social interactions, social cues, and the desire for rigidity and structure, probably account for a lot of the comorbidity, because autism has a high rate of comorbidity with a number of different issues. Some of the odder ones to me are things like gastrointestinal issues, but then you've got things like anxiety, depression, massive comorbidity, actually higher with women that have autism than with men, but still autism, anxiety, and depression, and that probably comes again from the difficulties that we experience throughout our entire lives, especially as children. There are definitely things things that people said or things that people did that have stuck with me 40 years later, and things that happened 30 years ago, 20 years ago, and those things stick with you, and that eventual fear can certainly lead to anxiety. That the fact that a lot of autistics very deeply do desire social interaction, but are unable to do it, and when they try, are mocked or pushed away. Can also, I could see that leading to depression as well, and then the desire for rigidity and routines and sameness can certainly lead to things like OCD. So the comorbidity, and we'll talk about that in other episodes. The comorbidity is pretty high with a number of different things, absolutely. So in 1987, the second thing that happened, psychologist Ivan Lovaas, I believe, he publishes a study showing how intensive behavior therapy can help autistic children. Now, this is something that I'm going to talk about later on, but I will cover it briefly here. But I'm going to talk about it in later videos. There's a number of different things that they use for children. ABA, something behavioral therapy, applied behavioral therapy, something along those lines. There's a number of different theories, different ideas, different systems that can be used to help autistic people, and especially children. And some of them have some great things. Really depends on where they are on the spectrum. Again, since no two autistics are alike, the one size fits all plan just is not going to work. So especially with adults that are diagnosed with autism, or adults that were diagnosed as children and still struggling, plans to help them have to be individually created, individually planned out. With children, it still needs to be, although there's kind of a guiding light, and there's, again, a number of different ideas, thoughts, systems as far as helping autistic children. My thinking on it, my theory on it, my belief in it is that the best ones are the ones that are not trying to force. Not trying to force a change in behavior, and not trying to teach this child that this is what you have to do because it's normal, or not trying to punish certain behaviors in the hopes of forcing it, basically, not actual beating, but basically figuratively beating them into submission, basically beating them into following a certain guideline, which again you would get to things like routines and stuff like that. But another common problem with autistics is they have a lot of difficulty with emotional regulation and dealing with their emotions, especially extreme emotions, and that can cause what I call meltdowns, but I'm sure there's a technical term for it, but can cause meltdowns, especially with children that have not developed, because eventually most of them will still start to develop some abilities at emotional regulation and ability to deal with extreme emotions. And these behavioral therapies, they can help with that. A lot of them tend to deal with again, routines and structure and teaching along those lines. And again, because autistics are very pedantic and have a tendency to hold on to information. When they're told something, if they're told something as a rule and they buy into it, it's going to stick into their head. So is therapy for it, and it can help, especially the ones that are much lower on the spectrum. Now, some people on the spectrum will say that they hate terms like high functioning, low functioning, stuff like that. I understand, as an autistic, I understand how that's not the most pleasant way of putting it, but unfortunately it does actually apply when you look at things like autistics that are absolutely 100% unable to care for themselves in any way, shape, or form. And it's not things like, say, nonverbal. There are nonverbal autistic adults that are perfectly capable of taking care of themselves on a day-to-day basis, perfectly capable of holding jobs and interacting with the world and maintaining a home and maintaining themselves. But then there's others that are not. There are autistics that are absolutely 100% totally incapable of caring for themselves by themselves. And that, to me, that there definitely is a line of higher and lower functioning as far as again, being able to care for yourself, take care of yourself, support not necessarily support, but just on a day-to-day basis, get yourself up, brush your teeth, change your clothes, flush the toilet, wash your clothes, eat, feed yourself, things like that. So a lot of the behavioral therapy for children is geared towards helping them understand their emotions and teaching them to learn to deal with those emotions and teaching them proper ways to handle situations. And it has shown to have an effect to help people children with autism. In 1991, autism finally got recognized as a special education category, which then opened it up to a lot of the federal funding that exists for children with developmental and learning disabilities. Basically, it finally got considered a disability and not just a mental disorder, because just because it gets put into the DSM does not mean it's considered a disability or handicap. It's just now considered a mental illness or mental deficiency or mental problem. In 1991, once they recognized that as a special education category, now autistics were now able to have federal protection, at least in school, federal protection for their condition, and we're now able to have access to federal programs to help them. And that's one thing there's a lot of money, at least within the public school systems, as far as programs in helping autistic children, but not as much as people would like to think. Autism is the fastest growing mental or learning disability in the United States, and it has been for quite some time, and it has increased greatly. And you have some people that the conspiracy theorists that say, you know, certain things cause autism, which has 100% absolutely been debunked by all forms of science. But you know, they'll say that, oh, you know, it's you know, there's more autistics because of this or because of that. No, the reason that there's a higher case of autism diagnosis now is because we've gotten better at it. We've gotten better at it because this autism spectrum is so massively huge that there's a lot of people on there. And again, there's people that you would never tell. Most people, 99.99999% of people in my daily interactions will never tell. Even ones that have known me for years. The ones that have known me for decades would not know. Would not are surprised when I tell them. So, you know, the ability to mask, the ability to hide it starts to play a big role in it as well. But it is the fastest growing learning disability in the United States, and yet it is the least funded. It is the least funded of all of them. And in further episodes, we will talk about the research and funding for autism and the scientific research towards autism. One thing that I will say is that and I will of course talk to you guys about charities and institutions and organizations that are out there to help autistics and or research into autism. Plus, you know, anybody that wishes to donate with us will certainly continue that on. There will be some details down below the video. I'm sorry, my brain's going a couple different ways. That's another problem that we have a tendency to have. And just to throw this out there for you guys, by the way, again, it's the least funded of all the learning disabilities, despite the fact that it's the fastest growing. Also, on average, studies have shown that on average, autism costs $60,000 a year to a lifetime of somewhere around $1.4 to $2.6 million a year in additional costs beyond normal costs. So an autistic child, depending on where they fall on the spectrum, of course, an autistic child can cost on average upwards of $60,000 because you run into all these things such as you need to pay therapists, you know, therapists or behavioral therapy, or, you know, possibly you send them to a special school, or you have to pay more for certain things because they have to have private lessons instead of, you know, say a swim lesson. You know, some autistic children will need a one-on-one private swimming lesson versus being able to go to a swim class, which is of course going to cost more. Plus, as many of us may know, things like such as therapists are not cheap, which I understand because they spend a whole lot of money going to their schooling. So I mean, I get it, but it can be very, very, very expensive, very expensive. And that's not even counting some of the minor things such as autistic children can be kind of damaging at times. You can have to sink a little bit of money into things. I mean, I'll tell you, when I first put a television in my son's room so he could watch his cartoons, he didn't even make it 35 minutes before he absolutely destroyed it. Absolutely destroyed it. So it took a little while to, now he absolutely loves his television in his room, but and he didn't destroy it by breaking things, and I think he tried to clean it and just poured orange juice over it. I'm not too sure why he did it, but plus the DVD player. So it's expensive. It can be very, 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 very expensive for people, especially for parents. It can be very expensive. It can be very emotionally draining. It can be very emotionally rewarding as well. But you know, it costs a lot of money. It can cost a lot of money. We're going to talk about something else very, very shortly on that. So that was in 1991. Finally got added to the federally recognized as a special education group. Now in 1994, Asperger's was added to the DSM, and it was actually folded in to autism. So autism was expanded out to include Asperger's as a milder form of autism, where they show higher functioning, and that's around when it started being looked at, classified as a spectrum. That's why it's oftentimes referred to as ASD, autism spectrum disorder, because it covers such a wide area. Now in 2009, The CDC estimated 1 in 110 children were on the ASD scale, which was up from 1 in 150 in 2007. The increase is likely, again, due to improved testing. Now, that was in 2009. It's 2022 right now. The last statistic that I saw, which was that I saw maybe 2 days ago, said 1 in 44. 1 in 44 are considered to be on the ASD scale in some way, shape, or form. Again, due to higher testing, to increased testing, not due to it showing up more, but due to increased testing. This number is likely going to continue to close, to get smaller as our testing and research improves and gets better, because there's still some interesting things, such as males are 4 times more likely to be diagnosed with autism than females. And scientists don't believe that males are more likely to have it because women and men present vastly differently, very, very, very differently. It tends to be more difficult for women to be diagnosed with autism. The number has closed. It used to be, 1 in 300-400, then it was 1 in 200, and that number's getting smaller and smaller as far as women go. But most likely, as our testing and understanding of autism improves, that number of cases is likely to go down as well, or to 1 in 44 right now. It's likely to end up even more. And here's the thing, and I'm saying this as an autistic person, I don't consider autism necessarily a handicap. In a lot of ways, autism can almost be looked at as just another, I wouldn't say another step in our evolution or something along those lines, but just as almost like a branch, almost a branch of humanity. Because when you go back through history and look at some of the famous people that either were confirmed as autistic or likely to be autistic, you've got a number of groundbreaking scientists, a number of people that changed the world, absolutely changed the world, because the ones that show a higher level of intelligence, plus have slightly different thinking and a strong tendency to stick to routine, stick to structure, they make very good scientists. They make excellent scientists, and oftentimes they can think outside the box. They make intuitive leaps. So it's not necessarily a handicap. It can cause difficulties, yes, absolutely. And you learn to either accept those difficulties or you learn to try and deal with them. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a handicap. An autistic person is not necessarily some lower life form. They could have immense benefits to humanity and to our society and to our sciences or our arts. So, I just want to put that out there. So, in 2013, it's when the DSM folded everything all into one ASD umbrella, defining it in 2 categories. 1, impaired social communications and or interaction, and 2, restricted and or repetitive behavior. So again, we're going back to those 2 very, very common categories within the ASD spectrum. But again, there are so many of them. So many of them. So I hope you guys find this interesting. I hope I'm not too boring for you guys. I do my best not to talk any kind of monotone or anything like that. I definitely hope you guys find this interesting. Look out for further videos from us. We intend to talk a lot about autism. We want to get more knowledge out there, more understanding out there, especially as more and more people are discovering either they have it or they have a family member, a friend that has it. Oops, sorry. Thank you again for watching, everybody. Please hit that like and subscribe button, and we will catch everybody next time. Thank you for watching. Bye now.